All right, hello everyone. Can we give that another panel, another round of applause? That was amazing. Thank you, Amanda, Tressa, Leela, and Charmian for that amazing conversation that proves really the urgency of the work that you all are doing. It's now my pleasure to introduce our conversation on Black women in media and journalism. Errin Haynes, editor-at-large of the groundbreaking, nonprofit, gender equity-focused 19 News, will moderate. She's a longtime friend to All In Together, and we're grateful to have you here. Next, she'll be joined by Karen Finney, a CNN political commentator who has served as a spokesperson for the DNC, Hillary Clinton, and Stacey Abrams, among many other leading women. Karen also serves on the boards of NARAL, Ultraviolet, and Power Rising. Alexi McCammond is a national political reporter at Axios and has been recognized nationally for her political writing and commentary across media platforms, having been named to Forbes 30 Under 30 and receiving honors from the National Black Journalists Association. Also on the panel is Tara Setmayer, senior advisor for the Lincoln Project, where she hosts the live show, The Breakdown. She's also a scholar in residence at the University of Virginia Center for Politics and former GOP communications director. You've seen her on The View and across ABC News as a guest contributor. Please now welcome to the stage Errin, Karen, Alexi, and Tara.
How's everybody? Y'all look great. It's been a good day of programming so far? Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I am coming in hot from Philadelphia, and I am so thrilled to be in conversation with three women that make me sound smarter all the time for my journalism, and also who I sometimes compete with on the campaign trail and in politics. So it's really a privilege for me to be really having a conversation that really feels like kind of putting the group chat out there for y'all, because this is definitely something that a lot of us talk about quite often. So I think I just want to start by opening it up to all of you as we think about what this moment in media and what this moment in terms of the rallying cry, listen to Black women. How are those two things intersecting? How do you see those two things intersecting now? And how do you think that the media landscape would really change if more outlets centered women, and Black women in particular, in their coverage, something that I certainly do at the 19th, but that's not something that is the norm. We know that. Instead of what we see now, which is really kind of this reliance on outlets like the 19th, like Essence or the Griot, to tell the stories of Black women as the main story as opposed to like the side dish. Karen, we'll start with you and just come on back.
Okay. Start with the easy stuff, right? I will say I think it's gotten a lot better in terms of centering conversations on Black women. And I say that in part, one of my titles that they did mention, I used to host a show on MSNBC. And Melissa Harris Perry was on the network at that time. And we would commiserate that it was a challenge to try to, what we would say, bring in new voices and faces, especially in the political sphere, because as Tara knows, there was a lot of the same folks all the time and wanting to bring in new voices and faces, because when we are at the table, when we are in these rooms, we have a different lived experience that we bring to the conversation. And we bring to the conversation particularly about what is news, right? And what is the perspective that we should be thinking about, and not just, sometimes, particularly in news, there's a tendency, there's groupthink, and there's certain, one outlet will say, well, I got to follow so-and-so because they wrote this story, so we've got to follow that story. And you try to say, well, hold up, there's a different story here. So I would just say I think it's gotten a lot better because there are also more outlets like the 19th. I mean, pretty much anybody can be a content creator these days. And that really has changed the landscape, and I think the media industry is understanding that. And the last quick thing I'll say is, I was looking at a study this morning by Reuters about how younger people are saying they get their news from TikTok. They're increasingly not as much from traditional outlets because it's bumming them out. It's like it's bringing them down. And who can blame them, right, with what's going on? But I think that also puts pressure on the media industry in this landscape to listen to more diverse voices and faces, particularly Black women, in order to stay relevant, in order to keep their audience, because we're going to come to the table with some different ideas and different perspectives, again, about what is news, what should be covered, and how should it be covered.
Yeah. Alexi, what would you add to that? I mean, obviously, you're at an outlet that's fairly new as well, and you certainly are covering what Black women are doing in politics. You just did it last night. I'm not bitter about you breaking that story at all, but no, go ahead. But I mean, what would you add to just the value of centering Black women and what that adds to the coverage and to the conversation?
Is this working? Hang on, use yours. Hello? Yes. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to see all of you. Thank you. You're usually the one beating me on my coverage, so this is like the one time that I beat Errin on anything, and I'm sure she has a story coming out later today that'll make me cry. But that's the good thing about having more than one Black woman covering these types of things. We are in friendly competition with each other. And we are showing people, like, you know, there doesn't have to be just one, right? I don't apply for jobs and people say, well, we have Errin, so look elsewhere, you know? And that's really incredible. And you inspire me. You make me work harder than anyone else does. And that is so powerful because otherwise our models of success are white men.
Yes.
And, like, that's fine in the sense that, like, they have been successful, but their way of being successful is not the way that I'm going to be successful. The way that they bring their skills to the table is not the same way that I'm going to do that. And it's really hard. It was really hard for me in the beginning of being here in DC to unlearn that.
Yeah.
And to be like, actually, it's okay. I don't have to be someone who's like not sleeping and who's very direct all the time and grumpy and like super serious and never says
grumpy.
Yeah instead of yes. You know, it's just like, I want to be a real person. And so if we had more Black folks in the newsroom, that would be a lot easier, but especially editors. I mean, we talk about reporters. There's definitely gains in that respect, but we still have so many white editors, and that is the biggest challenge because it's like not only will your pitches get turned down sometimes, but then the framing of the stories you always have to correct, and then there's this negotiation and you feel like you're stepping out of turn, even though, to Karen's point, we have this perspective that should be invaluable and valued, but it's often kind of looked at with skepticism, in part because these folks just literally do not have the same lived experience.
Yeah.
An example I've heard in newsrooms before is like white editors being like, student loan debt cancellation, more than 10,000. Why does it really matter?
Right.
You know, and it's
I think everybody in this room knows why it matters.
You should be able to imagine that some people that could help. You know, that could help some people, including people who look like them. So there are a lot of things, and I think a lot of changes that need to be made. Another thing I think that would be really helpful in having more Black women in particular, but just Black journalists covering politics, is we see the race baiting from the right all the time. Conversations around critical race theory did not center on race until like weeks and weeks and weeks later, because everyone was like, well, this is about education and parents and white parents only.
Yeah.
And it was so long until someone was like, hello, is anyone talking to Black parents in Virginia?
Whose parents, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so and the last thing I'll say, which is another good example, everyone using the word woke and like not knowing how to define it, but loosely defining it, I think, is like, I don't know, progressive social issues that would make life more equitable for folks of color.
That's a pejorative, though, now. That's definitely a pejorative.
Right. But it took, you know, in my newsroom, we had an editorial meeting, and I was like, guys, we should not be saying this unless you want to offer a proper definition, and we stopped using it. Yeah. So sometimes you have to speak up, even if you're the only one. I am the only Black woman, Black reporter on our politics team. That is definitely a struggle. But like I said, look to folks like you for help and appreciate situations like this to get the word out.
Yeah, I told y'all the group chat is jumping out. Tara, what would you add to what Karen and Alexi have already said about why it's important to center Black women, to normalize Black women's representation? Yeah, I echo everything that my fellow colleagues here have said. It's an interesting experience from another perspective, being a Black conservative for many years that presents its own challenges, and there's presumptions about who you are and what you believe, and that were interesting. And for the many years that I was in those circles, I'm still a conservative, but no longer a Republican. I had to finally say enough is enough with that, because clearly I'm not welcome there. I don't recognize that party anymore. It's lost its freaking mind. And so, but as a truth teller, and as someone who has always been very straightforward, I'm from Jersey. It's in my DNA. I just can't BS. And so I had to tell the truth about what was going on. And part of that is, when you do have a certain lived experience, it's important to be in the room. Because a lot of times people, like I said, they have presumptions about who you are, or what you should believe, or what perspective you come from. And until they have interactions and actual conversations and experience with folks of different ethnic backgrounds, races, demographics, like all those things, if you don't have that type of diversity, not only in ethnicity, but in thought, then you lose out on having more robust conversations and perspectives that are important. This is such a diverse nation, and if you're not in the room, then other people will dictate how your story is told. And I will never let anybody dictate how my story is told. And as a result of that, I try to empower other women, particularly women of color, to never let anybody else dictate their stories either. You have to have a presence. Don't be bullied into silence. Don't be intimidated by the fact that you may be the only one in the room. That's okay. You're in the room. So you are paving the trail, paving the way, trailblazing for others to be in the room. We all come from a legacy of Black women who have blazed trails for us to be here. And I feel that it's a responsibility for us to carry that legacy on for others behind us and to set that example. So the more of us that are in the room, the more that we can do that. And so that's what I would add to that. Just don't be intimidated or afraid to be in the room or be the first. If you have to be, because somebody does, why not you? Yeah, you better lift somebody up out here, Tara, while we're sitting. Seriously, I mean, this is such a crucial part of what it means to be a Black woman professional in public, right? I mean, definitely a Black woman in media. So you kind of brought up just the fact that, yes, Black women contain multitudes. Black women are not a monolith, right? There's no one way to be a Black woman. So I want to talk about and hear from each of you, if you can think of, Alexi already gave several, but if you can give an example of when you, being a Black woman in media, kind of worked against you professionally and how you handled that. Karen, we only got a few minutes left, so don't. I know you could talk about this.
I have many.
An example.
Well, there have just been times, I will just put it this way, where I have been in the room or been on the air, frankly. Let's talk about that as commentators, where I made a conscious choice to bring Black voters or Black women, or how an issue was affecting the Black community that was not part of the mainstream political narrative. And you kind of get the eye roll from some of the particularly white, male, established political figures or columnists. And you just have to keep pushing through it because, there's that part of you that's like, ugh. But it's lonely. And I will just say, my mother said to me one time, sometimes that's your job. Because I said, oh, it's so lonely, it's so hard, it's so whatever. And she's like, sometimes that's your job.
Yeah.
And then to make sure others can come in the room. So I think, I'm not going to give one specific, but I will say there have been plenty of times in conversations on the air when I have felt like, okay, I know what everybody wants to say. It's Democrats versus Republicans. It's this versus that. But I'm going to go that way because I want the audience to feel seen and heard in this conversation.
That's such a good point, Karen. I mean, I feel so often when I'm on air, speaking, it's not my fellow panelists even that I'm engaging with. I'm engaging with the people like my mom, the people like my niece, the people like my aunt who need to hear from me and who need to hear my perspective, right? It's not always just about answering the question that you're being asked, especially when we need to speak for our community, for the lived experience is not always being represented. Tara, do you have an example that you can think of when you being a black woman was not was not to your advantage?
Well, actually, it was the opposite. For me, I had to battle with being tokenized. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I am not going to, I'll give you, a certain network started calling me to talk only about race issues. Yes. And this is many years into my career in politics where I have a breadth of knowledge on things from like, the nuclear triad and foreign policy and, Afghanistan. Right. But I can also talk about domestic policy issues from everything from Social Security privatization to education reform to whatever.
But that's not what they were calling me for.
That's not what they were calling me for. And so, I worked on Capitol Hill for many years and as a comms director, but I also worked on federal law enforcement issues. I worked on immigration reform, things that weren't the typical Black person portfolio. It wasn't just welfare and, prison and, criminal justice reform. Those are important issues. That's great. But when the certain network started calling me only to talk about any time there was, a shooting or there was some type of racial issue, I said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Those are important issues, and there are people who specialize in that. And when it's appropriate for me, I will comment on those things. But we're not going to pigeonhole me into every time there's an issue that concerns a person of color that you call the top 3 Black people that you have on your contributor staff. And so I had to establish that very early on. Now, not everyone is willing to do that. Some people just want to be on TV and they don't care. So they allow themselves to be tokenized. And it's unfortunate for them because I think that's a missed opportunity for everyone. I think it sells people short for what they actually have to offer. So for me, it was the opposite. I had to put my foot down about not being tokenized. And I think that's an aspect of this conversation that happens too that's sometimes very uncomfortable because you think that you may get those opportunities just because you are you're the one, they check the box, right? But you don't have to be that way. And there's ways where you can set boundaries so that you're respected for the expertise that you actually do bring to the table that has nothing to do with the color of your skin.
Yeah, because them calling you just for that one thing that they think you can do is not them actually valuing you. That's such a good point. Alexi.
Great one to add.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I have a great one to add. Great. It still haunts me to this day. Because I could not believe this conversation happened. This was a long time ago, covering campaigns, interacting with the Republican candidates' campaign. I mostly cover Democrats. I cannot cover everyone all the time. So he was being difficult and tough, and it was a story that, respectful, fair, accurate, but not helpful to them. So he was being direct. And I literally remember thinking to myself, like, I'm going to handle this like a white guy would. And I'm going to be direct and not be like, oh, you're right. Okay, whatever you want me to add, I'll add it. Like, whatever. I was just like being very direct. And I was like, you're not my editor. You cannot tell me to add all of these things. Like, this is not how this works. Like, whatever. Long story short, he ends up calling my editor, who calls me and tells me that I need to be careful with the way I'm interacting with Republicans because they think I'm a Democrat. And I was like, well, why? Why do they think that? And she literally was like, not an HR-friendly thing to say, but just so you know.
Oh, okay.
And then I was encouraged to apologize and buy this man beers. I waited a couple of days, sent a non-apology apology, and he literally was like, oh, it's not a big deal at all. I thought that was great. It was a respectful exchange, and I like going toe-to-toe, whatever. I'm like, well, you shouldn't have called my editor.
Right, that part.
Which is another thing. It's like, would you have called my editor if I were a white man? You would not have. And that is so insulting on so many levels. It's infantilizing. It's weird. It's like a waste of everybody's time. Yes. And it's not going to change the story. It didn't change the story.
At the end of the day,
it's like,
right.
You're wasting my time. So that haunts me to this day. I think because it's just a reminder that, like, people see us and have so many assumptions about us, no matter what our body of work is, how we present ourselves, like the way that we actually are, whatever our beliefs are. And that can kind of suck when we're in this really polarized time where everybody just wants to pit each other against each other.
Yeah. It definitely informs how they think that they can
stood
treat
your ground,
us.
though.
Absolutely.
You stood your ground, which is the lesson here.
Yeah,
And good for you for
absolutely.
that. Stand your ground.
Shout out to channeling your inner white guy, okay? Sometimes you got to do it. Sometimes you just got to do it. To stick with you for a second, Alexi, I want to talk about something that you brought up earlier, and that is really, I think, the sisterhood that a lot of us have found to help us get through this work. I mean, it is definitely a piece of the self-care toolbox to be able to lean on somebody else, even if they're not in your newsroom, because often we are the only one in this newsroom unless you start one and have 65% women of color. But anyway, just going to throw that out there to you, Alexi. We're hiring a politics reporter. Where are you finding support in our industry? Because we know that political journalism is still too white and too male.
Sorry, I didn't hear the first part of the question.
You're like,
too
yeah,
white and too
I'm
male.
filling out my job application. Great. No, I was saying, where are you finding support in our industry? Because we know that political journalism is just too white and too male, and it's been that way for too long.
Yes, it really is. Obviously, folks like yourself. And really, like, I am shameless in connecting with other Black reporters on the Hill, even those who don't cover politics. I'm always, men, women, whatever, always reaching out, making sure they're okay, especially recently, like the folks who are covering Buffalo. Yes. And we're out there and are Black. I'm like, what have you been doing to take care of yourself? And one of our colleagues was like, nothing. I had to go to Uvalde and I haven't had time to process anything. And I don't know that I want to. And I think that's what's hard is when I do connect with people, there's a lot of like, I don't know how to process. I don't know how to take time and decompress. And that's another conversation that doesn't really happen in most newsrooms, that unique experience and trauma that comes with being a person of color, a Black woman, a Black man, covering these things that affect our communities. But I'm always going out of my way, and it's not just with Black folks, any women of color, especially young women of color, covering politics, I always try to help them. And, they're asking questions not just about how to do the job, but important things like salary negotiations, that they literally will be like, well, this guy told me I could only ask for this much, and it's obviously way lower than they should be asking for. And I'm like, no, do not ask them for advice anymore. So that's sort of what it looks like.
Yeah. I think before I let you all out of here, I want to ask, Terry, you've already been dropping some gems in terms of takeaways for folks. For Black women who are in media doing this work, for Black women who are thinking about going into this work, biggest lessons that you all would say that you learned and a piece of advice that somebody can take out of this room to just encourage them as they're thinking about doing this or if they are doing this?
Well, first of all, you are your best advocate. Do not always rely on thinking that everyone else is going to advocate for you, because you know who you are, and never let other people make you second guess who you are. Because a lot of times people will do that. They want you, especially in the media industry. I'm not a reporter. I'm a commentator and, on-air analyst. And sometimes there are folks that want you to fit a certain box, or they want you to behave a certain way, or they want you to say something. And, well, maybe you shouldn't say it like this. And well, hold on a second. Now, not saying don't take constructive criticism, obviously, but never change who you are. And the best advice that I ever got was from my mom. And she said, be unapologetic for who God made you. And that has stayed with me since I was a little kid. And it stays with me to this day. So my advice here is if you are passionate about something, with passion comes purpose, and don't ever let anyone deter you from that purpose, because only you know what that is. And so the more you are comfortable with that, the more comfortable in your own skin that you are, the more successful and at peace you'll be, because you won't always try to please what other people want. If that's not who you are, don't do it, because people oftentimes will try to derail you. It's not always the best way to go. So be who you are. And the other piece of advice would come from Ida B. Wells, who is someone that I admire greatly, who is one of the, trailblazers that I talked about. She did not play around. She was at a time that, they were lynching folks, and she was, they tried to burn her stuff down. She had to leave Memphis. There was all kinds of stuff. And when she tried to march in the women's suffrage movement, they told her to march in the back. She said, no, I'm not. So Ida B. Wells was a beast. And she said, if you want to right the wrongs, you have to shine the light of truth upon them. And that's what motivates me in what I do, and that should motivate all of you in what you do, that if you feel as though something's not right, somebody's got to shine the light of truth upon them, so let it be you.
Right, yeah, follow that. Great.
Sure, I know.
Okay.
Come on, Karen.
I'm just moderating.
I'm gonna go practical and then try to be inspirational. You know, one thing is what I learned early on, particularly as a woman of color, we have to know our facts and figures. We have no room for error. Yeah. So ever since when I first started as a commentator, even when I was an anchor, I fact check everything. And you will see me on television. I have a little notebook all the time because if I say something, I know it's true. I don't just, say my thoughts and feelings. No, it's fact-based. And one time we were about to go on the air, and a certain white colleague made fun of me. And I looked at him, I was like, I am a black woman in media. Yes, I will have my notebook with my facts and figures. Yeah. Thank you. And so I say that to say, do what works for you and be unapologetic about that. I have my little notebooks and sometimes it's awkward, but that's what I have to do for me to feel like I am delivering the best quality analysis for the audience. And I'm always thinking about people who are watching. And as a black woman, the responsibility of who we represent and showing that, I can talk about, and I think Tara and I are pretty lucky, we get to talk about all kinds of different times. They've asked me to talk about foreign policy. I'm like, all right, I can do that, right? Sports is probably the one I'm not so great at. But I will come prepared the way I know I need to be prepared. And so I would say, understand what that is for you and make sure that you do it. Whatever you need to be prepared, do it. Figure it out. Spend the time. That's actually self-care. And then do it. And then the second thing I will say, which sounds like something very similar to what Tara's mother said, that my father said to me, actually when he was dying, he said, don't be afraid to take up the space in the world that you own. And I was like, okay, But I think for all of us as black women, and so I think about Alexi and I think about Errin when they call and they're working on stories, and I know that they're probably, not so much Errin, but pushing back on an editor to say, I'm telling you, this is a good story, this is the angle, to try to support you. And to say, don't be afraid to take that space up. If you're in media, if you're in journalism, keep at it. Keep trying, keep pushing, keep pitching, because we need you in there doing it, broadening the conversation and reflecting our lives and experiences.
That's great. I will just put a finer point on it and say, just quiet out the noise. There will be so many opinions and so many people telling you what you should do and, what you're not doing right. And I feel like should statements are based in shame and judgment, and we should not listen to those. But just, try to quiet out the noise. Everyone and their mom will have something to say, good, bad, ugly, it doesn't matter. Literally do what they've said and focus on yourself and what feels good and what works for you, because that might look different, but that could also be successful.
Much like both of your parents, my mom's advice to me ever since I was young was to always step with all your weight. And so that's what I try to do when I do this work. Yeah. And so that would be my advice to anybody, no matter what you're doing, especially in media, because we need black women stepping with all their weight right now because it matters. And we are the truth tellers. And you should listen to all of these women. I am so glad, except for you. Karen, Celtics or Warriors? Did you want to weigh in on that before we?
Warriors.
I'm kidding, Karen.
I have to go for the Warriors as a New York fan of all sports. But
you know what? I
really
can't
wasn't for anybody in the Celtics
joking.
ever.
I was picking on Karen's sports expertise.
Is that rivalry will never die?
But this was amazing. Thank you all so much for your candor and just for letting the group chat out for our audience here. Thank you all for being so attentive and just for making space for us to have a conversation that a lot of us are having internally, but to feel supported in a room like this really, really does mean a lot. You have no idea. So thank you.
Thank you.